I've covered a ton of cryptids on this channel, and one that I frequently get asked to cover is the Blemmyes. And I can see why, because these creatures, or humanoids, well, they're just so strange. There is a lot of documented encounters of these humanoids throughout the centuries, or millennia in this case. One of the first reported encounters happened 2,500 years ago by a Greek historian. This historian stated that there were headless creatures that lived in western Libya, and that their eyes and mouth were in their chest. Now this location at this time was reported to be a very forested area that had a lot of strange creatures, such as donkeys with horns and very odd-looking enormous snakes. The next documented encounter with these humanoids happened in the 1st century by another Greek. This Greek said that they were not monsters or fairy tales, but a real tribe of people that lived in Nubia along the Nile towards the Red Sea. It is even written that Alexander the Great came face to face with these headless people and that he captured 30 of them to show the rest of the world that they do exist. But since this story comes from an author in France from the 12th century, it makes it very unlikely to be true. But I do find it interesting that a writer from this time period wrote about Alexander the Great encountering these headless men. Now it wasn't just the Greeks, even the Romans talked about them, and their descriptions of them was exactly the same. Headless creatures with their eyes and mouths in their chest. Then many years later in the 14th century, a man named Sir John Miller wrote a book about his travels. In this book he wrote about people who had no heads and that their eyes were in their shoulders. Now he didn't call them the Blemmyes, so he probably didn't know that the Greeks and the Romans also talked about them, which is interesting. He also wrote that these people lived in Asia, not in Africa, and he believed that they were cursed. Then 200 years later, in the 16th century, another British explorer, Sir John Walter, claimed that during his travels, he heard about people who had no heads, their eyes were in their shoulders, and their mouth was in their chest. They also had hair on their shoulders. And surprisingly, the people who told Sir John this were not people from North Africa or Asia, but the natives of South America. And this really blows my mind, as these people in South America never had any contact with the Greeks or the Romans, but yet they described the exact same people. And they told Sir John that they were a tribe that lived just north of what is now Brazil. Now while I was researching this video, I came across an interesting article that stated that Christopher Columbus, before he set sail to the New World, believed that he was going to discover distant lands that were inhabited by these headless men, as well as other legendary monsters. But he didn't think he was going to encounter any other humans. Columbus even wrote in an official report that he had discovered many islands inhabited by people without number, but he didn't encounter any monstrous men. So even during this time period, people believed that monsters did in fact exist, especially at the ends of the earth, which I find fascinating. Now we obviously have never found any proof that these headless humans ever existed, but since there have been so many documented encounters throughout the centuries, it does make some people wonder, especially since people in South America, before they ever had any contact with Europeans, claimed to have seen the exact same people. Some researchers have speculated that maybe they were once tribes of humans who raised their shoulders to great heights, a process that would start when they were infants, very similar to head binding. Others believe that these headless people might have been alien beings. One thing I would like to add is that in some of these ancient texts, they were said to be extremely tall. Another strange cryptid that I wanted to talk about today was once thought to exist in India and Ethiopia. This cryptid had only one leg with a huge foot. These people were known for just laying on the ground with their huge foot raised, shading their face and body from the sun. And that is how they got their name, Shadowfoot, because they were always allegedly seen outside with their huge foot raised in the sky. They were also said, despite having only one leg, to be extremely fast and agile. Now, unlike the headless humans, there are very few documented encounters with these people, but yet they were drawn on a lot of ancient maps, making people believe that they did exist. Many explorers would go to India or Ethiopia hoping to get a glimpse of these fantastic people, but they could never find them. Now, during the times of the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, and many other ancient civilizations, there were many tales of monsters that people believed truly existed. Like the headless humans, the Shadowfoot people, giants, the Cyclops, the dog-faced people, and many others. So it must have been extremely frightening to travel, but yet maybe also extremely exciting. Could you imagine believing that if you visit this location, you'll actually see a cyclops or a giant just walking around? I mean, how awesome would that be? Now there is a theory that these mythical creatures might have existed during these ancient times, or at least one time long ago. I have talked about this a few times before in previous videos, and it is a pretty extreme theory, but it basically involves aliens doing experiments on us. Now if aliens do exist, and they are extremely advanced, they probably see us how we see rats, and maybe from time to time they just get really bored and start doing crazy things, like making a man have no head or putting the head of a dog in a human body. We ourselves do tons of experiments on animals. In fact, the Russians in the 1920s even tried to create human-ape hybrids. So if we do it, why wouldn't aliens? I know it sounds like a crazy theory, but maybe it isn't that crazy at all. Until next time, this is Paranormal Junkie. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned.